Hi, welcome to my Borderpolar podcast. I'm Lynette. I wanted to throw together a video real quick. It's sort of a hodgepodge of a few of my other videos put together, so it's not seamless, it's not great, but it is the 9 symptoms of BPD all in a row with a little bit of clarification on dissociation in there. I just wanted to put this out there for anyone who wanted to see the symptoms of BPD aside from the symptoms of bipolar, and just know that it doesn't go all in a row because these clips are from 2 different videos. So I hope that it's helpful and I hope that it's informative, and here we go. Welcome to my Borderpolar podcast, the 9 symptoms of BPD and what do they look like in real life. So the first symptom of borderline personality disorder, and again, these are as they're listed in the DSM-5 Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for mental health disorders, I think is what it's called. I'm not sure exactly, so don't quote me on that. But in the DSM-5, number 1, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, or a fear of abandonment often is what you might hear when you're talking about BPD. So what does this look like or manifest? How does it manifest in real life? So some ways that, and I'll show at the end of the video all the resources that I looked at. But here's from my own experience, from what I've seen, and that's how I gathered these, from my own experience, from what I've seen in the support groups that I've been a member of for the last year, and what I found online, and then the different resources that I include at the end of the video. How do frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment look in real life or manifest in someone's real life? Sacrificing your needs for others. Struggling to maintain healthy relationships. And that can come in the form of the need for frequent reassurance from a loved one, forming unhealthy attachments with people who might not be necessarily good for you, the cutting off of loved ones sort of at the drop of a hat or at the perceived slight. It can result in overly intense and erratic behaviors in order to avoid abandonment. Self-sabotaging behaviors such as oversharing, misplaced anger, impulsivity, lashing out at loved ones, and a poor self-image are included in this imagined abandonment. And I see this a lot actually in the support groups that I'm in. A lot of people posting pictures of themselves stating that they're garbage or they're trash or they're ugly. And this both shows a poor self-image as well as a need for frequent reassurance, because you're definitely looking for someone to tell you that that's not true. But at the same time, it's clear that they feel that it is, but they desperately need someone to reassure them that they're worthy. And so that's something I see a lot of in the support groups. And then a heightened sensitivity to rejection. And unfortunately, that ends up, I'm sorry, my speech gets stuck sometimes. Unfortunately, that ends up being something that happens more often than you would like it because of the self-sabotaging behaviors that you might exhibit in order to try to avoid rejection or avoid abandonment. Actually brings right on the rejection or abandonment that you're so desperately not wanting to happen. That's what self-sabotaging means. Behaviors that are going to bring right on the thing you're fearing, the abandonment or the rejection. So if we can recognize these behaviors in ourselves and see what we can do to try and avoid these types of behaviors, then we might not have as much of a struggle to maintain those healthy relationships. And some of the tools that we explore in DBT can help with that. Symptom number 2 of borderline personality disorder is a pattern of unstable relationships, characterized by alternating between extremes in idealization and devaluation. So you might have heard the term black and white thinking, you might have heard the term splitting. Both of these are both terms for dichotomous thinking, which is this thinking of things as all good or all bad, a complete success or a complete failure. And this comes out in several different symptoms in borderline personality disorder, and we see it here in this one spelled out right for you, that in these unstable relationships, you have a characterization of someone alternating between idolizing someone and then devaluing them. So that's what a lot of people refer to as when they say I split on my partner or I was splitting today, but it can actually happen in a lot of different contexts. So let's look and see how this pattern of unstable relationships with these extremes can look or manifest in real life. And remember, we're not just talking about romantic relationships. We're talking about friendships. We're talking about family relationships. We are even going to touch on work relationships and how that can affect your work life. So it can look like someone being extremely affectionate and doting one moment and then pulling away the next. And oftentimes this is in reaction to something that that happened that might have hurt their feelings or been perceived as a slight. Some sort of condescension or put down, I guess, in some way, where they feel like they were made, where they were made to feel less than. So if someone brings you down, whether they mean to or not, it can cause sort of this split, this black or white, this change, and a change might go from being affectionate and doting to pulling away. It may also, at the bottom here, you can go from needy or clingy behavior or anger and fury, and these can be disproportionate to the event that's happening. So it also includes the extremes in emotions that you feel with borderline personality disorder. It's all very complicated with the symptoms. So it might look like being extremely affectionate and doting one moment and pulling away at the next. It might look like chaotic, intense, or conflict-filled relationships. And again, these can be romantic relationships or otherwise. From extreme devotion to extreme anger, or many short-lived romantic relationships. And this can also mean a lot of on-again, off-again romantic relationships, or maybe even friendships too, or even family relationships that tend to go from periods of not speaking to periods of being fine. Relationships might include accusations, anger, jealousy, bullying, control, and breakups. Now, a lot of the times when we exhibit behavior, it's difficult to recognize it in ourselves. And so some of these things, not everyone's going to experience all of these things. Remember, not everyone experiences every symptom of borderline personality disorder, but it's important to take a look at yourself and see if any of these things apply in your life, and examine whether it has to do with any of these symptoms that the DSM-5 lists. It can also appear in terms of unstable work history or frequently quitting jobs. So if you're working at a job and it's the best job in the world, and then something happens and all of a sudden you hate this job and it's the worst job, then that is still a relationship that you have, whether it's a relationship with a human being or a relationship with an enterprise. So we have to be able to watch ourselves for that kind of behavior. And then if we want to look at the secondary symptoms of this pattern of unstable relationship, moving into symptom number 3, identity disturbances. Markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. So I don't know if this needs further clarification, but when someone has an unstable self-image or an unstable sense of self, it means that they don't really have a concrete idea of who they are. And that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. And I have some here, and there can probably be a lot more. But here's some things that I came up with from what I've seen, what I've experienced, and what I read in my research. So this identity disturbances can manifest itself in several different ways, including someone having frequent changes in their appearance and or interests. So someone dyeing their hair very often, sort of mirroring others around them in order to determine what they're interested in one moment or another, maybe their style of music or their taste in movies, or whether or not they're interested in sports or some other sort of entertainment, which leads us to adopting the interests, mannerisms, and style of others. So even fictional characters this can happen with. I know for me there are several characters on TV that I identify with and make up a big part of my personality. I can include in that both Rory and Lorelai Gilmore and Jessica Day from New Girl, and all of the characters from Friends in one way or another. I have adopted their mannerisms into my life at one point or another, and it never really went away. Probably Joey Potter from Dawson's Creek as well. And I didn't know that this was something I was doing until I learned about these symptoms, and it made a whole lot of sense to me in my life when I did learn about this. Going through these symptoms in such depth was very eye-opening for me, in terms of understanding my own life and borderline personality disorder. Difficulty dealing with change is another symptom that goes along with this, and that has to do with the inconstancy between what you feel like you maybe would like to be as a human without knowing what you are as a human, having that lack of sense of self, um, and what you think other people think you're supposed to be or what society thinks you're supposed to be. And so living with this constant inconsistency, it makes change very difficult because you're already so unsure. So difficulty dealing with change can stem from this identity disturbance. Another side effect of it is a low self-esteem, low amounts of self-respect, and low amounts of self-care. And that might translate into things like unhealthy personal boundaries, um, or maybe getting mixed up in people who aren't good for you. Again, might come into play there. So working on self-care, self-respect, and self-love to increase self-esteem is very important if you have a borderline personality diagnosis. Um, it might translate into frequently changing jobs or frequently changing romantic partners. Again, if you're not certain who you are, it's very difficult to understand who you are in relation to your job or others around you. And so this can cause a lot of impulsivity and frequent changes in um, important life things like where you work or who you surround yourself with. It can also translate into feeling a loss of your identity, as I mentioned earlier, when a relationship ends, because you have so much of your own identity wrapped up in that other person that when the relationship is over, you might not feel like you exist or not know who you are anymore, um, even if you probably didn't know who you were while you were in the relationship either, but that person would now be gone and you would have to redefine if you can. Um, and then another side effect is temporary hyper investments in roles, value systems, worldviews, and relationships. So this might translate into someone changing religions. It might, often it might translate into someone um, getting very into something like, well, anything, just getting very into some interest and then getting very into a different interest and then getting very into a different interest. But it's even with relationships, it happens that way. A lot of short-lived relationships that are very intense and very um, fast-moving, maybe. These are just some ways that identity disturbances can translate into your life. And if we take a look at the secondary symptoms to make it a little bit more um, the next symptom of borderline personality disorder is impulsivity in at least two areas that are potentially self-damaging. Some examples that are most seen are including spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, or binge eating. There could be more. You could get more specific about spending and you could say gambling. You could get more specific about a lot of things, or there's a lot of other ways you can be impulsive, but they in at least two areas that are potentially self-damaging. And here are some of the big ones. And how can this look or manifest in real life to get just a little bit more detailed than this? Overspending or impulsive or unnecessary purchases, gambling, engaging in impulsive, reckless, or dangerous sexual behavior, and that might include, unprotected sex with multiple partners or um, risking legal trouble, things like that. Abusing alcohol or other dangerous illicit drugs or prescription drugs, driving too fast or without care. Binge eating is pretty self-explanatory. Screaming at or threatening to harm others is another way impulsivity is going to show itself, and also quitting jobs suddenly would also be another way. There's a lot of ways that impulsivity rears its ugly head in borderline personality disorder from several different symptoms. But if we're talking about impulsivity from this symptom in these two areas that are self-damaging, I would include the screaming at or threatening to harm others in there in some ways, because if you're going to get yourself in legal trouble by being aggressive, then that would also be self-damaging. Um, but we are going to touch on that more in another symptom. Number 5. Symptom number 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. So more specifically, how can this look or manifest in real life? There's a lot of different ways that this can be seen, but it can include cutting, scratching, or hitting oneself, excessive piercings or tattoos, picking at the skin or the scalp, biting, digging fingernails, pulling hair, banging your head against the wall, telling others that you want to kill or harm yourself, and engaging in reckless behavior that could result in death, such as reckless substance abuse. I see a typo there. I'm going to fix it later, but right now it's going to stand. Reckless substance abuse, reckless driving, neglecting attending to medical issues that may be life-threatening. And these are some ways that I think people might not think about self-harm. But if you have a medical issue that's, is could be life-threatening and that you need to take care of and you're not, that's also self-harming behavior. And reckless driving is also in this same, it is sort of like suicidal behavior, because if you're putting your life at risk, you're not taking care of it, and it still, I think, would fall underneath this symptom if you're experiencing these types of symptoms as part of borderline personality disorder. And the secondary symptoms, symptom number six, affective instability. So it's a different instability due to a marked reactivity of moods. This have to do with moods reacting quickly. Intense episodic dysphoria, dysphoria being the opposite of euphoria, so a very down type of feeling as opposed to a euphoric feeling. Irritability or anxiety, usually lasting a few hours and only rarely more than a few days. So this is going to be a depressive, some depressive symptoms going on, and some mood symptoms going on. But it's different than your borderline depression in its length. But other than that, it's pretty, a lot of the symptoms are going to be the same, except that, well, let's go through these symptoms and see what it looks like in real life. In real life, this affective instability due to the marked reactivity of mood, so how moods can react very quickly. You might see inappropriate displays of anger, inappropriate displays of panic, inappropriate displays of fear, and inappropriate displays of agitation. And I read those all separately because it's very important that we realize that those are all different types of feelings: anger, panic, fear, and agitation. But when you see an inappropriate display coming from each one of those feelings, it might look the same. It might just be yelling, but it comes from a very different place. So all four of those feelings are going to be overly heightened due to this instability and this reactivity of mood. So usually this is happening in reaction to an event, or a perceived event, but it can occur spontaneously. You might be having a conversation and just it's the wrong moment for someone and they are reactive. Oftentimes there's difficulty calming down once reactive. So it's not the same as bipolar depression, but dysphoria, the dysphoria includes depressive symptoms. I want to mention that because I want to talk about this a little bit later. Um, Emotional outbursts toward loved ones or strangers, aggressive displays including hitting or throwing things, acts of self-harm or suicidal behavior or threats, and then erratic behavior that may be dangerous, such as reckless driving, physical or verbal altercations, or impulsive acts. So these are all things that have to do with this reactivity of mood. But the intense episodic dysphoria, that depression, encompasses all the same basic symptoms of the bipolar depression. That's what I want to touch on right there. But this affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood can look like all of these different things, and oftentimes it's going to be a quick change. It might be another way that you can look at splitting, depending on when it happens or how it happens. If someone does have a reaction because something happened and their view of a situation changed, then splitting would qualify here, or dichotomous thinking might be a reason for a reactivity of mood. Let's take a look at this. Of borderline personality disorder as chronic feelings of emptiness. Now that might seem self-explanatory, but for someone who doesn't know what that means, I'm going to explain. And I can tell you that I've lived with this symptom from the time I can remember things. Before all of my memories include this. It's just a persistent emptiness, a pit or an ache in your stomach, similar to the one that most people experience right when someone that they love passes away. And sometimes it's bigger, Sometimes it's larger than other days, and other days it's smaller, but the pit is always there. And I didn't know that this was a symptom of the disorder that I had until I was diagnosed when I was 36 years old. But I had always lived with that feeling and not knowing that there was a reason for it. It includes such things, the symptom induces such things as a constant need for instant gratification. So trying to fill, sort of trying to fill that void, searching for things to fill that void. A lot of people will turn to things like sex, drugs, or shopping. Um, there's a disturbance in the relationship of the self that's inside with that of the outside self. So the pit sort of adds to the symptom of identity disturbances in that it makes you feel almost like grieving for your own self all the time. I don't know if that makes sense. This chronic feeling of emptiness and this longing for wanting to know who you are supposed to be might turn you into having some kind of chameleon personality, which I talked about before, where you can emulate um, the mannerisms or moves of someone else, but it might be so much so that you're just sitting there watching a TV show and the character, and you're not in a great mood at all, but the character on the television is smiling, and then you find yourself smiling. Or the character on the television show is grimacing and you find yourself grimacing. That sort of chameleon, or adapting to behave like anyone that you've just met. You just meet a person and you just become their same person. This chameleon personality can be related to these feelings of emptiness, sort of like always searching for something to fill that void, or some sort of meaning or purpose, because you might feel like life doesn't have a meaning or purpose. So you might seek it out in being like someone else. You might lead to depression or uncontrollable crying, difficulty with motivation if the feelings are too intense, the empty feelings. I mentioned already searching for something to fill the void. And it might lead to overdependence on one's partner to meet all their emotional needs. This there's a lot of It's a very complicated type of feeling, and it's really hard to explain to someone who doesn't feel it. But these are some ways that I was able to write down how it might manifest in someone's life. The eighth symptom of borderline personality disorder is inappropriate intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. And this might, sorry, my speech gets stuck sometimes. This might manifest itself as frequent displays of temper, constant anger, and recurrent physical fights. This was one symptom that when I was first diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, I looked at all the symptoms and I said, yeah, that's me, yeah, that's me, yeah, that's me. And then I went to this one and I went, that's not me, I'm not violent. And then I realized that I'm angry, even though I'm not violent. I have constant anger, and I've tried my whole life to be a positive person on the outside, pretending so that my anger didn't get out. And it did sometimes on my own when I was young. I broke things when no one was looking. And I punished myself. And even though I never really allowed myself to give that anger to other people, I definitely had what you would call borderline rage. I just didn't unleash it on anyone but me or my belongings. Other ways that I found this manifests in my life, or it may manifest in other people's lives, include an extreme amount of impatience, outbursts of anger, sarcasm, or yelling, intense feelings of anger, rage, or agitation, feeling like you might go over the edge. It might result in road rage for some people, throwing things or hitting things, frequent arguments with loved ones or even strangers, bosses, coworkers, family members, um, might lead to legal trouble or trouble in the workplace. It might lead to abruptly cutting off relationships, and a lot of that on again, off again romantic relationships that you see. And so remember that this is these intense feelings of anger, rage, and agitation, any inappropriate displays of anger, inappropriate displays, are going to be bigger than the situation should warrant. Um, so if you notice behavior like this in yourself, or if someone else notices behavior like this in yourself, and you really have to take a look and see, am I feeling this way, and am I exhibiting this behavior, and what am I going to do about that? So the secondary symptoms, borderline personality, the last symptom of borderline personality disorder, which we're going to talk about in a little bit different way, is transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So we're going to look at paranoid ideation by itself, and then we're going to look at severe dissociative symptoms by itself. So paranoid ideation, experiencing paranoid thoughts, is a psychotic feature that can happen in borderline personality disorder. Along with having paranoid thoughts, you'll experience anxiety and stress. You'll experience distrust. You'll feel exploited. You might feel isolated or like a victim. You might feel like you're being persecuted by others. You will, if you're experiencing paranoia, interpret body language, words, and glances either as hostile or as about you when they're not about you. You might think that you're being watched, or that you're being spied on, or that other people have motives towards you that they might not really have. Paranoia might be a difficult one to recognize in yourself, because you don't know when you're being paranoid, and you don't know when you're trying to follow your gut. So sometimes this is a difficult one to accept that you have going on, or it's a difficult one to pinpoint that you have going on. But paranoia can happen, and it's one of the scariest symptoms in my opinion. I've I've been there before, and it's difficult. It's very difficult. And let's look at some secondary symptoms of paranoia. The second term I want to talk about today is dissociation. Dissociation can feel like having an out-of-body experience, or like you're a different person sometimes. I've heard people explain it where they'll be touching their own arm, but it just doesn't feel like it's them touching their arm. You might feel your heart pounding, excuse me, or be lightheaded, feeling emotionally numb or detached, or feeling little or no physical pain. But dissociation is basically a breakdown or a break in how your mind handles information. You can feel disconnected from your thoughts, feelings, memories, and surroundings. Disassociation can affect your sense of identity and your perception of time. Dissociation, and how does it feel in real life? So you might feel like you have an altered sense of time. You might find yourself not remembering how you got somewhere, having tunnel vision where there's a lot going on around you, but you sort of feel honed in on one feeling or one thing, or maybe just a spot on the wall, but or having tunnel vision about a topic, or something that's going on in your life too, focusing on that. Hearing voices in your head, having intense flashbacks that feel real. These are all ways that dissociation can feel in real life. Sometimes you can become immobile. You can feel stuck physically and you aren't able to move. And then the last one is getting absorbed in a fantasy world that seems real. Now, if you've experienced any of these things, you've probably experienced dissociation. Most people with BPD have experienced dissociation. Some of the warning signs that you might see looking into yourself and worrying about dissociation to see if you're experiencing that, look for things like rapid mood swings, trouble remembering personal details, being forgetful about things you've said or done. And I know sometimes this can be difficult because it's hard to believe sometimes when someone tells you you've done something and you don't know that you've done it. Um, Behaviors or abilities that have changed. So feeling like your identity is altered, like you don't feel like you anymore, or like if your tastes have changed or your interests have changed drastically and you're having an identity change. So that might be a symptom of you dissociating as well. Depression, anxiety, or panic attacks can be combined with dissociation, thoughts of suicide or self-harm. Substance abuse can help to cause dissociation. You can also turn to it during dissociation sometimes. And then it mentions here that failed treatments or hospitalizations for mood disorders can also contribute to dissociation. But we know that we're talking about dissociation now because we're discussing it in terms of mood disorder, borderline personality disorder, which dissociation is a symptom of. Oh, my mistake. Let's look at dissociation. Dissociation can happen in a couple of different ways. It can happen in depersonalization, which is, so dissociation is basically feeling like you're not experiencing the reality that you're in one way or another. So in depersonalization, you might feel separate from your body, as if observing your body from the outside, or as if in a dream. In derealization, you feel detached from the external world, so you don't really feel like you're part of the world that's around you. Things look strange, familiar, unreal, unfamiliar, unreal. And then you might experience amnesia, where you forget or lose time. You might have identity confusion. Dissociation could come in the form of identity confusion and that inner struggle about who you really are and who you are in relation to others. So you might dissociate in some situations where you're experiencing identity confusion. And then identity alteration is a sense when you're acting like a different person. So you might dissociate and feel like you're acting like someone else. And I've experienced most of these in one way or another. And from what I've seen on the support groups that I'm in, dissociation is a very complex issue. It's a very personal issue, and it's something that people have experienced in a lot of different ways. It's kind of difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced dissociation, but those are some ways that it can manifest in real life. Secondary symptoms of paranoia and dissociation include anxiety, mood instability, maybe some rapid mood swings, especially well, with either one. If you start feeling paranoid, you might have a mood swing. If you start dissociating, you might have a mood swing. Feelings of isolation, feelings of non-existence, and thoughts of suicide or self-harm can definitely happen because of all the intense confusion that might be going on during those moments of paranoia or dissociation. So that wraps up the 9 symptoms of borderline personality disorder. And I believe the next slide should be the beginning of my bipolar notes. One. I have 2 pages of references here for you. They're a little bit long today, but I really do enjoy verywellmind.com. Psychiatric Times Positive Psychology is a great one. Psychology Today. And then I've got this second page of references for you here. And this includes information that I got for the video as well as the graphics that I used. So again, this has been Series 1, Episode 2, Understanding Borderpolar, and this is my Borderpolar podcast. Thank you for joining me.